Welcome, sisters and brothers, to the first of a two-part presentation on the spirituality and the spiritual principles of the sixth step of our Alcoholics Anonymous program. My name is Stephen DiMartino. I'm a deacon in the Archdiocese of New York, and it's my great privilege to be able to share with you in this and our next installment some reflections on the sixth step. What is the sixth step, you might ask? I hope you know it, but let's be reminded of what the sixth step says. We were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Sometimes when people get to the sixth step in their program of recovery, they take a deep breath and say, well, this will be an easy one because the really hard one was the fifth step, when I had to make that list and then to share it with my sponsor. But there's a number of things that we need to unpack in our understanding of the sixth step. And there's actually three principles or spiritual underpinnings of the sixth step. And I want to talk about the first one today. But the first one is called willingness. The second one is surrender. And the third one is courage. So willingness, courage, surrender, those are the spiritual underpinnings of the sixth step. And in order for us to fully embrace what the program suggests that we do in working our sixth step, we need to understand those principles. And so for these next few minutes, I'm going to try and unpack that. Let me quote to you first from what the Big Book says, page 58. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Page 59, one of the more famous slogans, half measures availed us of nothing. Page 72, we have admitted certain defects. We ascertained in a rough way what the trouble is. We have put our finger on the weak items in our personal inventory. Now, these are about to be cast out, and this requires action on our part. And then again on page 76, we then look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted as objectionable? Can God now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us to be willing. Sisters and brothers, that's where we begin in our spiritual understanding of the sixth step. The focus is on willingness. And the willingness, and this is the trap that we sometimes fall into, our willingness is not a willingness to let go, but it's a willingness to let God. Because in a proper understanding of the spirituality of step 6, we acknowledge that it's our higher power that removes the defects. And our responsibility is to enter an attitude of willingness and to talk about what are the ways that that can unfold in our lives. Some of the old-timers have said, and I want to give you a quote now from one old-timer, our shortcomings are not magically and irrevocably banished from us. They are separated a distance away or removed. God shows us how to set them aside. We can choose to take them back, but now we have choices, and we can choose different thoughts, words, and actions. And another quote from an old-timer, if you believe that God can move a mountain, why not also believe God will remove the deficits and the defects that you just listed? And not only that, but believe that God can and will replace them with His gifts, with the fruit of the Spirit. And so the essential question then becomes, in our spiritual understanding of step 6, are we willing? Many times we have attended self-help meetings and we've heard people speak about willingness, because that is, again, the core of our sixth step. So let's say a little bit more about willingness. Our character defects are the undesirable traits, attitudes, and beliefs that cause our lives to be unmanageable, that cause pain to other people, and that create a block in our spiritual growth. The disease of addiction creates a separation from self, a separation from others, and a separation from being consciously aware of the higher power in a person's life. So when we reflect on that reality in the context of the sixth step, it is important to realize that the words, "these defects of character," refer right back to the other words, the exact nature of our wrongs, that were admitted in the fifth step. So our inappropriate behavior is related to the attitudes and the thoughts and the words that run around in our heads that are the genesis of the inappropriate behavior. That's why in the program we talk about having to make changes in attitude and behavior. And so the sixth step builds on our new awareness in our transformed, sober lives that our behaviors have deep roots than just what happened when active addiction was controlling our behaviors. That our character defects are oftentimes older, deeper, and more entrenched in our personalities than the loss of control that occurred with active addiction and some of the horrendous behaviors that ensued from that loss of control. So I'm trying to say that in the sixth step we begin to understand that as the program teaches, putting the plug in the jug and not drinking and going to meetings prevents addiction-related behaviors and attitudes from gaining control in our lives. But what about the other stuff? What about the stuff that was there before the act of addiction? That stuff being our defects of character, entrenched attitudes often taught to us by those who cared for us and moved us through the world even when we were quite young. And in order to address those entrenched defects of character, we have to adopt a posture of willingness. First of all, to want to be rid of those defects of character. For some people in their recovery process, there's not a willingness to remove the defects of character because that would be an acknowledgement of the reality of sobriety. And what I mean by that is the person able to look in the mirror and say, I am lovable. I deserve to be sober. It's okay to live without this disease controlling my life. And I want to be in service to others. If we truly, honestly believe that, and if we truly, honestly put the efforts, then we must be willing to purge ourselves of all of our defects. Now, I wish I could say to you, sisters and brothers, that this is something that we could do in one meeting or in one movement through the 12 steps or in one reading of a conference-approved literature like the 12 and 12 or the Big Book, and that would satisfy the removal of character defects. But it's not going to be quite that easy to do. It's going to require efforts, action, and the support of those who understand the steps and what's necessary in order to work the steps. And that's why it's so important in the context of sobriety to have an active program, to be working with a sponsor that knows how to move people through the steps, to reach out for support and not to see the working of the steps or the piling up of abstinent days as all there is to it in the recovery process. In step 4, when we put the inventory into our awareness and then eventually into writing, we begin to understand how the character defects of a person lead to some of the behaviors, many of the behaviors that were inappropriate, that eventually we will try and either make direct amends or amends indirectly, depending on the circumstances. But by becoming ready to relinquish our defects, we show our willingness to do what it takes to stay abstinent. And that's a summary of what I was saying previous to this. And our list of defects includes all of the self-defeating attitudes and behavior patterns that have been revealed to us in our conversation with our sponsors, in what we've heard in the rooms, and in what we have been able to put down in our previous steps. I'm going to repeat again what I said a few minutes ago. What is the root of our resistance to be willing to ask our higher power to remove our character defects? And what the program teaches is the root of that resistance is fear. What's it going to be like if I actually live a sober life? How is it going to be, maybe for the first time in my life, to say that I'm a good person, not a bad person? What's it going to be like to move through the world without having to fear anything? Do I believe that I can do that? Do I believe that I deserve to be in that understanding of myself? Do I think that I have gifts to offer others? As I move through the steps, particularly in my 12-step service work, do I understand that my service is rooted in the higher power's love and acceptance of me? Can I do the same for myself? So much of our resistance to change is based in fear. And what the higher power says to us is be willing to allow your higher power to remove those defects of character. And so ultimately, sisters and brothers, the willingness is not just, am I ready? But the willingness is to allow God to move in a deeper way in my life. The willingness is not just to make the list and to share the list, but the willingness is to bring that list of defects into my prayer and into my service, and to be open to how the higher power can, in the mysterious and grace-filled way that God works in the lives of us all, can remove those defects of character. It sounds almost too good to be true. It sounds almost like this is some spiritual flotsam and jetsam from some other place and some other time. But if you listen to the old timers, if you listen to those who have gone before you in the recovery process and hear them talk about how the steps unfolded in their lives, you will hear the stories about willingness. And it's a different kind of willingness than the one that is rooted in our egos. It's not the same as the willingness to do something different where I make a willful decision. It's the willingness that allows God into my life in a deeper way. And how do we do that? That happens in the 11th step. Through prayer and meditation, our conscious contact with our higher power deepens and becomes more present to us. Maybe in mysterious ways, but that's why this is a program of spirituality. This is a program in which we reach out for support, and we are willing to allow our egos to be secondary versus primary. We are willing to allow God into our hearts, where, by the way, God has always been, but has been disconnected because the disease has created a barrier. Become willing to say, here are the defects of character that I struggle with, and then please God, remove them. That is the spiritual principle in the 6th step, and it's the principle of willingness. And it is not a technique, it is a posture in our prayer and in the way that we approach our higher power and in the way that we keep trying to be the best sober person that we can be. And so, sisters and brothers, I ask you to please reflect on these realities. Reach out for support. Love yourself enough so that you can begin to let God deepen God's understanding in your own heart and remove your characters of defect. God bless you all.